Hugo, so let's switch roles for a second. If you had to pitch intuition to founders, what would your elevator pitch sound like?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like it's a friend in your cap table that understands what you're going through, and that basically is probably as crazy as you, even more sometimes. But we're not founders, so it's a bit different. As crazy as you around the delusion you have to basically target millions of people. You got to be crazy to think that what's in your brain is going to resonate with millions of people. That type of delusion, that type of thinking, that type of almost like sweet, crazy ambition needs to be essentially protected, nurtured, cultivated by the people around you. So that's what we do. That's essentially the friend that is a bit cooler and a bit geeky in your cap table.
Welcome to the EU Startups Podcast. Sit back and enjoy the show hosted by Marcin Lewandowski.
This episode of EU Startups Podcast is brought to you by Vanta. Are you building a business? Achieving compliance with frameworks like ISO 27001 and SOC 2 can help you win bigger deals, enter new markets, and deepen trust with customers. But this can also cost you real time and money. Vanta automates up to 90% of the work for the most in-demand frameworks, helping businesses get compliant quickly. And with over 300 integrations, you can easily monitor and secure the tools your businesses rely on. Join over 7,000 fast-growing companies that use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. To learn more about how Vanta works and to get 20% off, visit vanta.com/EU Startups. That's vanta.com/EU Startups. Now, kick back and enjoy the show.
Hey everyone, this is Marcin Lewandowski and you're listening to the EU Startups Podcast. My guest today recently co-founded a new early-stage VC fund focused on consumer tech with the coolest name and manifesto in the business. You'll learn more about it in a minute. Everyone give it up for Hugo Amsellem, the co-founder and general partner of Intuition. Hugo, it's such a pleasure. Welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Marcin. Yeah, I'm really impressed by your introduction because that was done live for people who don't know. It's not like something that has been edited. So, congrats.
No, yeah, but I truly love. By the way, congrats on founding Intuition. I love the name, and I went through Manifestos just last night preparing for this interview, and I think it's awesome. Yeah, congrats on that. Maybe let's dive right in. Your journey from rocking the music industry with a decentralized label to diving into the world of video creators and consumer startups, and now co-founding Intuition sounds like hell of a ride. What got you hooked on the idea of empowering founders in consumer space and shaping consumer culture?
I mean, it's funny because now that you say it, you sort of like put the perspective into what I've been doing before and what I'm doing now. I started by trying to help artists, like musicians, essentially become independent and build their own careers. I built my first company with that angle. That was 2010, 11. So essentially, I was trying to help those folks just scale and put their art into the world. And then I helped founders do the same. At the family for 7 years. And basically during that time, like 7 years, most of the friends that I made as founders that I still have, in my life right now, they're doing stuff in consumer. And funnily enough, after I did that, then I essentially tried doing the same with creators, video creators, because at the time when I built my first company, video creators didn't exist, right? It was just like musicians that were on the internet and basically scaling themselves. And so with the YouTube and TikTok sort of like movement happening, now you have like this new generation of creators just, basically like doing millions and millions of views. And again, I got obsessed with them. And so essentially what happens is that either you're helping artists scale themselves online, or you're trying to help consumer founders, scale themselves online, or creators. But in the end, you're always doing the same thing, which is backing individuals who are trying to basically influence millions of people, right? Because when you're building consumer companies, you're targeting millions of people, that's for sure, at least. And they generally do that going against the status quo of something. Whether you're an artist, a creator, or a founder, it's the same thing. So I guess that when you put it into perspective, which is what you just did, and that's what prompted this thinking. That's what I like, backing individuals that are just trying to do things at scale. That's what's fun.
Amazing. Hugo, so let's switch roles for a second. If you had to pitch intuition to founders, what would your elevator pitch sound like?
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's a friend in your cap table that understands what you're going through, and that basically is probably as crazy as you, even more sometimes. But we're not founders, so it's a bit different. As crazy as you around the delusion you have to basically target millions of people. You got to be crazy to think that what's in your brain is going to resonate with millions of people. That type of delusion, that type of thinking, that type of almost like sweet, crazy ambition needs to be essentially protected, nurtured, cultivated by the people around you. I'm not saying that if you're a consumer founder, you only need to be friends with other consumer founders, but empirically, that's what happens. Empirically, when you're building in consumer, you're surrounding yourself with those people. And we're one of those. I helped founders scale, creators scale, artists scale. My co-founder is a former basketball player. The analogy between sports and consumer entrepreneurship is also super, 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 super strong. So we're that type of people. The way that I pitch it a little bit, and I know it's an elevator pitch, and the elevator is already at the 1,000 sort of floor right now. But the way we say, the way we describe ourselves, my co-founder and I, we often say that we're the cool people for the geeks, and we're the geeks for the cool people, right? So when I'm talking to artists, creators, athletes, I'm super geek. For them, I'm like, wow, oh, can you do this, blah, blah. When I'm talking to founders, I'm a little bit cool, but I'm neither or, to be frank. So that's what we do, that's essentially the friend that is a bit cooler and a bit geek in your cap table.
Awesome. Sounds awesome. Hey, so let's talk about the term consumer. It often sounds like someone mindlessly munching on snacks, right? But you flip the script, emphasizing it's all about the culture, not just consumption. So can you share more on what consumer means to you and intuition?
Yeah, because when you start evolving in tech, people say, oh, you're doing B2B or B2C. Beginning, you're like, what the fuck you're talking about, right? It's like if you talk to your parents, they're like, what the fuck, right? So then people say, okay, it's it's business to business, and you're like, okay, you're selling to business, I understand. Or it's like business to consumer. And then you're like, but what is a consumer really, right? And then so people generally say, you're just selling to people. So we could say business to people, right? But then those people that you're targeting when you're building in that space, they have to be millions. There have to be a lot of them, right? It's like you're not hunting for elephants like you are in the enterprise space. Like my friends at Point9 would say, you're hunting for flies, right? So millions of flies you need. When you do that, when you need, by definition, your company to change the way millions of people, billions of people now are going to behave, you're essentially changing culture. So for me, saying consumer is a bit reductive because it's not about consumption, it's about how people behave at scale in groups, and how your product, your service, your sort of ambition is going to change that. And so that's why we say consumer and culture when we talk about intuition and the thesis that we have around it. Because to be frank, the type of founders that want to do that specific thing, that want to play that specific game are very, very, very specific. And it's funny because as a founder, I failed as a founder, right? So I cannot talk about myself, but as a founder, when you move culture, it's the high you always want to get back. And it's the same with artists, and it's the same with creators. And in a way, it's the same with athletes, because athletes are seen by millions of people. They are the inspiration for millions, literally dozens of millions of people. When you moved culture, you want to get that again, right? So the consumer founders, the founders trying to change culture, are often in the need of getting that high back. And it's really, really difficult for them to do something else. And that's the type of people that we really want to be surrounded with.
Hugo, that's awesome. I'm hooked. I actually read that in your manifesto last night, that this is the high you want to get back. And sounds like you really do. Speaking of your manifesto again, to me it's like a consumer tech revolution wrapped in a taco. It's bold, spicy, and full of flavor. Can you share maybe a little bit behind the scenes, like how did it, how did you guys come up with it? How did it come together? And what inspired those insights?
But so with Etienne, we were like, why do we like this shit so much? Because it's so. Etienne and I are very ambitious people. We want to be successful. That's something that is really deeply inside us. But there's something in us that it feels like we don't have a choice but to do consumer, right? Despite the fact that it's really hard, to invest in consumer in general, but specifically in the past few years, so you're like, okay, if you really, really, really want to be successful, your chances are not to be doing a fund that is only focused in consumer. So we had to think about why we actually didn't have a choice but to do this, right? And so we sort of worked backwards of why are we doing this? Why don't we do won't we do anything else? Yeah. And so we started to sort of unpack this deep, fuzzy feeling of us being on a mission to basically back those founders. And so we started thinking about this, and we started thinking about this in a more sort of conscious way, that one could also be something, this manifesto that we wrote, one could be something that we could always go back to, be like, why are we really doing that, right? This is an intuition, of course, it's the fund is named Intuition, but we could always go back to it. But also, sometimes we realized that founders, where they're not surrounded with the right people, and again, if you're a founder, your job is not just to be surrounded, but to change your environment, right? But sometimes as a founder, you also struggle, you go to your VC drinks, and then which you shouldn't go to necessarily, right? Because it's not just the best investment of your time, but you just go and then you see successful founders, blah, blah, and they usually have done something in B2B, and then you're like, why am I doing this, right? I'm struggling with my D30 retention at 5% flat, and those guys are just raising more money than ever. So you need a bit of a reminder why. It's, of course, an emotional, irrational decision to be building in consumer, but you have specific points that are half rational, half emotional, that are a bit the sort of the unpacking of this fuzzy feeling, that when you read again, you're like, yeah, I remember why I'm doing this,
Man, this is awesome. You also talk about the loneliness economy. I saw your article about it yesterday. And, being a founder, building for millions, as you say, can feel like you're kind of stranded on a deserted island.
Yep.
How does Intuition aim to address this loneliness and create a supportive community for founders?
So it's a very, very, very big topic. One, it's a large topic. Two, it's a topic that I'm obsessed with, not necessarily just regarding, helping founders be less lonely, but in general helping our generation, our society being less lonely. And for me, it's an obsession that I've had at the same level than the obsession that I've had about empowering creators or artists. And for me, it's two sides of the same coin. That's really weird, but essentially, and I'm going to do a little detour on this, but when you give incredible tools to individuals, essentially a phone, internet, etc., what happens is that it's amazing because they don't need the permission from anyone to scale themselves and build an empire, right? Like creators, one phone, one empire, it's amazing. Startup founder, one laptop, one empire, amazing. But what happens is that even if this phenomenon, this permissionless phenomenon is incredible, and I celebrate it, at the same time, this independence, because we don't need many people except just our phone and our laptop, right, to do a lot of stuff now.
Yeah.
This same phenomenon is creating loneliness, because when you don't need anyone, then you're independent but you're lonely. And so this happens, of course, at the maximum level for a video creator, for example, because literally it's like one phone and that's it.
Right.
A little bit less for a startup founder, because you still have maybe co-founders and employees, and then you're all in the same boat, like this adventure. But of course it happens for each and every one of us, because we are all a little bit a creator now. We are all leveraged by technology, right? So this is a topic for me that's really, really important, like in general, transversally in the society, but for founders especially, it's actually very, very, very profound as well, because you're alone most of the ride when you're a startup founder, right? The only moment that you're not alone and you have people cheering you on is when you start your company and when you succeed, when you exit, right? That's the two moments where people are like, yeah, I always believed in you, man. Yeah, let's catch up for coffee. Let's grab blah blah. In between, it's not, right? There's like a friend often said that, like, if you're building a company, it's like if you're going, like, swimming across the Atlantic, like at the beginning people are like, yeah, sure, you're going to swim across the Atlantic, it's crazy. Then you start and people are on the boat, like looking at you and be like, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you doing this? And then when you go to New York, then it's fucking amazing again. Like, oh. And so it's the same when you're building a consumer company, you're crazy most of the times until you're not. And craziness, because you're crazy in sort of like relatively to your environment, craziness is a very, very lonely feeling, right? Be like, fuck, am I alone believing in this thing? And so around that sort of like, like journey, what we're trying to do essentially, of course, one, that's why we're building the fund like that, writing a consumer manifesto. Be like, we believe in you, right? Like, we are people who believe in you. It's normal to feel crazy most of the time and to feel lonely most of the time. And two, what we're doing is that we're essentially gathering consumer founders in small sort of like laid back formats in every city in Europe and the US that matters in terms of like startup hub. And we're doing that every year, like we're just basically launching our consumer tour. The format is very simple, 50, 60 founders, just a few investors, because, when you're lonely, sure, you feel lonely. Like when you're alone, you feel lonely. But when you're surrounded with too many VCs, you even feel more lonely as a founder, right? So we gather founders, mostly founders, 95% founders, just a few investors that love consumer like us. And then we basically get together. And the founders that come to those events are always saying the same things. It feels so good, right? To be surrounded by people who understand the game you're playing. So this is how we do it. It's both by speaking the language, by speaking your heart around consumer and the crazy journey that it is, but also doing that sort of like community work of gathering people together.
Sounds awesome. Hugo, I don't remember who it was, but it was one artist who said that, the loneliest he ever felt was always when he was on the stage in front of like huge audiences. So there's definitely something to it. Getting back to your manifesto that I like so much, it also mentions the importance of building trust and love with users, something that tech giants often struggle with. What do you advise founders to prioritize building these relationships while scaling their startups?
So yeah, of course, like when you're a startup, like the only thing you have is speed and focus, to be frank. Like that's the only opportunity that you have, but it's an amazing sort of like asset, because again, when you see like the tech giants, and if you've been unlucky enough in your life to work at one of those companies, you see how laggy this is, how slow it is, how unfocused it is, right? So you're a startup founder, speed and focus, amazing. That said, I'm an investor. And so the first thing that I would say is, as a founder, never listen to any advices from investors, like never, except like if the investor happened to just sell his company like 6 months ago and is still on the right sort of like operating system, like the same version, right? Because when I built companies when I was young, when I was just out of school, and I was not successful, but I was a founder. And so I could talk about stuff, because I was a founder. I could not talk about success because I didn't succeed, but I could talk about a lot of other things, right? When I stopped being a founder, I felt that my operating system was up to date just for 6 months after having stopped. After 6 months, I started repeating the same things that I knew, but I didn't feel. So right now, like if, you're a founder and you're listening to an investor on a podcast and like, just don't. And so the thing that I usually say is essentially either go talk to other founders and ask how they do, or just like go, talk to people who are talking to founders all day long and that are talking on their behalf almost, right? So of course, Y Combinator is an amazing resource around, like what they see, talking and being with founders all the time, being mostly founders themselves as well before. So go to them for advices, not to me, I suck.
100% agree with you. I hope still like founders will listen because you're giving kind of contrary advice here, even being a VC. So intuition has a strong, it seems to have a strong focus on Gen Z. How do you see these, rebels shaping the future of consumer culture? And how are you guys going to rock the stage together with them?
So Gen Z is an amazing topic, right? Like forever, you've had, of course, new generation, sort of like being opposed to like a previous culture to a previous generation. And so you always had this sort of like counterculture, right? Mainstream culture, counterculture. And that sort of like tension was sort of like the yin and yang that was moving the culture shift forward. What's really, really, really puzzling right now is that Gen Z is probably the first generation that is built as an archipelago of subculture and not like a new continent of culture, right? So like millennials were like a new continent, right? So you had like the people before, new culture, new continent, sort of like homogeneous. Of course, at the fringes, you have a lot of different, subcultures and stuff like that, but you really had like mainstream culture, counterculture, and new continent is being created. With Gen Z, the issue is that it's scattered around millions of small islands that have their own culture, that basically also move around a lot. So you're not staying on the same island forever. You're just doing island hopping, right, all the time. So what happens is that then the very definition of culture is being reinvented right now. If there is no mainstream culture, there is no counterculture. So you're entitled to ask, like, what is the culture, right? So it's this really like moving sort of like territory that is essentially enabling a new form of everything, new content, new platforms, new behaviors, new values, more dynamism instead of like sort of like static, analysis. And so what I think happens, in my opinion, but I'm probably wrong with this, as often, what I think this basically changes is that being like a cultural analyst becomes impossible. I think the only way you can analyze and predict anything is by having a static environment, right? So the only experts that are truly, possible are expert at something that doesn't move too much, right? Like, so mathematics, of course you can say like, oh, let's invent a new number and then everything changes. But still, like mathematics is just like one thing that doesn't move, right? So expertise and predictions are maybe possible. Physics also a little bit. Again, I'm not like a scientific guy, so I would just, but culture, when the culture was really slow, and so, like anthropology, you can You can do like a structuralist analysis in between cultures, but like this is sort of like fixated culture that have a lot of complex movement, but still, it was very difficult, almost impossible, but still. Now, the cultures itself are moving all the time. So the only thing you can do with Gen Z, the only thing you can do with this new generation behaving in very complex, sort of like a moving ways, is just to like look at it, observe it, and try to see retrospectively what happened, but impossible to essentially predict anything. The only thing that I can really sort of like benefit from as an investor is that it seems, but again, maybe not. It seems that Gen Z are by culture, but mostly by necessity, one of the most entrepreneurial generation we've ever seen. Mostly again, because they need to, but also because they can. And they, again, with just a phone or a computer, can now actually make money online without the permission from anyone. And that has never happened before, right? So that's actually something that's pretty cool to be investing in that type.
100%. But so like this, exactly. So this, scaling from 0 to 1, it's easier than ever before. But let's talk about scaling from 1 to 10. That can actually feel like, trying to juggle flaming torches on a unicycle. Can you spill some beans on the secret sauce for scaling, consumer startups from 1 to 10?
How the fuck am I gonna know? I don't know. The short answer is like, again, I don't have a fucking clue. And probably even the founders who've actually successfully scaled a company from 1 to 10, just they don't know. They know how it happened for them. Yeah. But they don't know what happens. What I do know is that right now, when you're harnessing a cultural movement, the network effect, the cultural effect, sort of like the mimetic theory that is applied at scale with just social networks and stuff, is so powerful that you can basically surf an incredibly powerful wave towards 10, right? From 1 to 10. That's for sure one thing. The second thing is, and that's quite sort of like new as well. So again, might be wrong, but that's what happens a little bit. I can sort of like see it. Right now, because it's really not easy, but it's more and more possible to go from 0 to 1. A lot of companies are starting as a consumer company with a consumer first DNA, targeting the end user directly, and then are sort of like morphing into B2B2C, B2B, etc. Right? So like think about like a company like Photoroom. Photoroom is an app that basically removes the background on your photo and essentially becomes from there your mobile first studio for anything commerce, right? So like if you're selling stuff online, etc., like you're just doing the whole sort of like photo shoot with the app. At the beginning, it's a consumer company. Oh yeah, like cool, like take a photo, remove the background, make it like funny, this and that. Now what happens is that one, it's a prosumer company because now like small teams, but professional teams are using Photoroom and are implementing it in their process, but also it becomes an API that then is served to other companies and sort of like gets their product being distributed with a multi-platform, multi-modal way, right? Yep. One is the app, the other one is the website, the other one is the API, and so on and so forth. And so what happens right now is that consumer also is not something you necessarily end up doing from 0 to 10. It's probably something you end up doing from 0 to 1. And then from 1 to 10, you get like a more hybrid approach, but still that is sort of like, infused with the mindset, the DNA, the values of like the consumer thinking, right? So it's also like a way to sort of like go from 1 to 10 now.
Yeah, awesome, Hugo. Let's talk about the consumer and culture tour. you like mentioned it before a bit already, but to me it sounds like the ultimate startup road trip. What's
Yeah.
the most exciting thing you've got planned, and what do you hope founders will take away from hanging out with Intuition? And maybe a follow-up fun question to that: if you could soundtrack this trip with one song, what would it be?
With one song about a tour, about like a sort of like a music band going on a tour. Like the first thing that comes to mind is like because I'm a big Beatles fan, and Paul McCartney wrote like a song after the Beatles called "Ben on the Run." Ben on the Run. Well, it's the music starts like the second part of the music, which is like very sort of like a punchy and yeah. So like that would be like the music that I would maybe put, like that's the thing, maybe put like on the beginning of the event. To be frank, I'd love that would be like a massive success for me if it helped the people who attend those events to just feel a bit better, right? To feel good, just feel like, oh wow, people want to be seen. They want to be understood, and I know that when you're putting consumer founders with one another, they usually feel understood. Of course, like if they only hang out with consumer founders, then they have like a FOMO of like, oh wow, what are you doing now? Like, oh, you're like, this guy is going viral, all those things. So maybe not, but if it makes them feel good and feel seen, that's already like a big success, And then if of course they want us to invest and they think about us when they raise their next round, it's a success for me. But that's like it's a byproduct of the initial success that I'm essentially prioritizing, to be frank.
Awesome. Hugo, I've been enjoying this conversation so much. It's one of the coolest I think I've had since I took over the You Startups podcast. Very personal and very no filter, no bullshit. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I love what you're doing with Intuition. I love like how honest you guys are and like truly caring about not only founders, but as you said, like helping people in general. I wish you all the best, and I hope to see you soon in Barcelona. Thank
Thank
so
you
much,
very much.
Hugo.
Peace.